depend on my student database. So first, I'll go to new. This time, instead of Java application, I'll create a Java web application because I want to use Servlets and HTTP and stuff. So let me just, so Java web project, student web. That's the name of the project. Then when you are creating a web project, in NetBeans, you'll be asked to choose a server, just like your WAMP or the XAMPP or MAMP or LAMP, depending on platform where you find yourself. So for my case, I will choose, in Java there are so many servers. You have Apache Tomcat, Glassfish, JBoss, WebLogic, a lot of them. But Apache is the most popular one, and most of them are built on top of this. So I'll be choosing Apache. Now when you choose Apache, here you ask, you choose which version of the EE. I talk about Java EE, that's the Enterprise Edition. Servlet is under those columns. Now the current version is EE 7. And this version of Tomcat I'm using doesn't support EE 7. But if I choose Glassfish server, it supports EE 7. But I'm not doing that, I'm using Tomcat. Then I'll click next. There are so many frameworks for Java. We have Spring, we have Struct, we have JSF, and we have Hibernate. At the moment, for today, I'm not using any of the framework. I'm going frameworkless. So finish. So it will create, you can see the web folder or web project. Now let's go through the folders in the web project. For NetBeans, you see the web pages, you see source packages, you see libraries, and you see configuration files. So let's go through them one by one. This is the web pages. This is where it will contain all your web pages. HTML, JSP, JSF, CSS, all your resources, everything will be here. Your JavaScript, everything, you do them in this place. Then the source package is where you do your Java code. So Java coding, I mean the class I've been writing so far, including your servlet. A servlet is a normal Java class, but it runs in a browser. It's a server-side technology. It's different from applet. So this is what I'll do. I'll just come to this side, copy this package, come and paste it into the source package here, so that I don't have to. And the normal circumstance, you don't have to copy it. You have to go through another web bar. Let's go gradual. It's complaining about. So I'll save it. So I've not changed any of my code. What is missing is that I've not added a library for this. So when I run it, I'll get an error. So I'll add my SQL library, add library. I'll come to my library files. I'm looking for my SQL JDBC driver. Add. I've added it. When I run this project, because it's a web page, by default it will call the index page. And when I created it, it came with what we call index.jsp. index.jsp. So when I just run this, and because I chose Tomcat to be my server, to be using the Tomcat to start the application. So you can see it's trying to start the Tomcat, and you can see the log. When there's an error, you get to know. When it's done, it will open the web page for us. So it's creating the WAR file, the jar file, all those compilations. It's compiling, putting everything together for us. Now it's now waiting for the Tomcat. Tomcat server started. I'm just reading. Then it opens the what? Hello world for us. That's the content of this index.jsp. It just prints hello world. It just prints hello world. Now in NetBeans, because an ID, it helps in faster development. So I'll just follow my student, where I'll add my student's name and the level to my database. There's drag and drop here, where I can drag the form component. Drag the form component to it. So that's what I'll be doing. So I'll remove this hello world, or I'll just welcome to student records. Student records. Then here I want to take two tests first. So I just open HTML form. I want an input test. So I'll drag it, put it here, you give it a name. The first one is what? Always make sure your names are equal to the what? The names in the database. So I want the name first. I don't want to give it any initial value, just test. Okay. Then I'll add another one, the level. Okay, if it's password, you choose password. Initial state, if you want to give it initial value. So this is my level. It picks the types and all those stuff. But before that, I needed a form. So let me just drag a form and put the form there. And the action, I will have to send this to what? Someone to handle it for me. So this is what I'll do. I'll come back to it, but I'll create a servlet. So I'll create another package. My servlet. Don't, I'll talk about what servlets are. Let me just use them. Now, when you are creating the servlet, in NetBeans, you'll be asked to whether you want to add deployment descriptor. If you are coming from, like you're an early Java programmer, those times, anytime you create a servlet, you have to create web.xml. We call it descriptor, deployment descriptor file. That's where you set all your parameters, the class name, and all those things. But these days, with the power of annotations, the art override that we were seeing, we call them annotations. They are codes which are injected at one time. You can ignore this, but for the sake of beginning, I'll check this one so that to add this guy for us. So I have my servlet here. I'll come to the servlet, but I just want to go back to the forms. I'll cut this, then I'll drag the forms back. Then the action I want you to go to the servlet. What name? I didn't even give it a name. I just chose new servlet. So let me rename it. Rename the servlet refactor. In software development, you have a concept we call refactoring. Anytime you are modifying a code, you say you are refactoring. Either you delete it, you change the name, you copy a code, and do any change that you do to a code, you refactor. So I just want to rename it to student web refactor. So it will change the appearance, so it will change this one everywhere I want to. So I'll go back to my index page, then I'll drag the form again, paste it, student. I want you to submit to student what? Web. Then you know you are a web developer, so you know the post and the get method. So if I choose post, I have to use the post to receive it. When I choose get, I have to choose get. For now, let me just any of them post. So this is my web form. Then within the web form, I'll paste what I've already dragged here. So I'll save it. And with NetBeans, as you save it, it will automatically what? Deploy for you. So I can just come to. So now you can see you have what? Welcome to student record. We've not added any label. So let me just finish with it. I'll add a break statement. There's no need to terminate this. I'll break this. break this one too. Then I'll type name level. So name and level, I'll save it. When I come here, I'll refresh. Now I have name and what? Level. I'll add one break statement so that the lines will be true. Then I'll add a submit button. So the button is also there, you can just drag and drop it. So submit button. Then I'll just say save. So normal one, you choose which one, whether I set standard or submit. So save or just submit button. So I call the submit button. I save it, I refresh my page. Now I have name, level, and the save button or submit. So you have this small form, and this form is supposed to submit to this. It's supposed to submit to this web page, which is what? A servlet, which is a servlet here. Now when you created a servlet, so I just want to submit this data to the servlet. Now let's go to the servlet. Let me try and send something and see whether it will see the servlet. You get these things a lot. So I have to do my URL as well. I'm having issues here. So action / save, go back, send again. Then I deploy it. Let me go and see the web descriptor file. The descriptor file. So it should be in the configurations. So you come here. Oh, okay, I have to come and change it. When I refactored, it didn't affect the what? The web.xml. This is what describes each servlet. The deployment descriptor file. So whatever I'm doing there was not reflected here. So it doesn't show, it doesn't know the student web. This is the URL mapping. So student web, servlet name, student web, and there's the class. So I'll save this and I'll go back and see whether let me refresh it. It's supposed to go there. Let me try and deploy the servlet. So right click, run file. Okay. So this is the web page. Student web / student web. So it needs a whole folder. Yes. So I'll go to the code in my index.jsp. This could be HTML. You can see this one, it takes HTML. You just change the doc type. You can see it's even HTML5 by default. Okay, so now you can move from our page to what? The servlets. So I can move from what? My JSP page to what? The servlets. Now I don't just want to move from there. I don't want it to just display. I want to take the value and set it into what? The database. So let me minimize this. Don't bother about the graphics. You know CSS, so you can make it look nice later. So This is just what? The link to what? My what? Web page or my servlet. Now when it comes to servlets, as I say, they are just normal Java code that's run on a server. You can see at this moment it's running on what? The Apache what? Tomcat. And servlets come with some default methods. You know, anytime you are submitting an HTML form or you are making any request, you have some standard methods that you follow. Either you are getting, you are posting, you are putting, you are tracing, or you are deleting. There are about 6 or so. But the common ones you are used to is what? The get and the what? The post. But the other methods too. Put, delete, trace, and the rest. And in view of that, any form that you submit, either you are submitting using what? Get or what? Post, as you specify in what? Your forms here. In our case, we use what? Post. So when it comes to the servlet, you decide. Not decide. There are methods. The methods, we call them do post, do get. All those methods which are applicable to any web page are there. Let me just try and see. Do, you can see you have do delete, do head, do options, do put, and what? Do trace. All these are any of the methods that you can use on a web page or using a web form. But the common ones are the what? The do get and the what? Do post, which you have to what? Override in your class. Now, servlets, all servlet classes come from a class we call generic servlets. Generic servlets are meant for anything on the web. You know, the web, HTTP is just one protocol. You have FTP, you have other protocols. HTTP is just one of them. But usually people use the HTTP most often, so they also trim the generic servlet to what? HTTP what? Servlet. So if you want to build a file, FTP servlet or FTP web page or anything, you don't use HTTP servlet. You rather extend from what? Generic servlet, not HTTP servlet. But once you say you want to create a servlet, by default it will inherit this one for you. So if you think you don't want this, you use what? Generic what? Servlet. Now we'll talk about the servlet lifecycle, but let's just get the data, process it, and do what? Display it. When you use Eclipse, NetBeans, by default these codes will come. You see do get and what? Do post. And because maybe in your application at a point in time you'll be using do get, another point you'll be using what? Post. You always advise to override both methods, the do get and the what? The do post. Then you create a third method, and in that third method you call the third method. So usually the NetBeans will generate a method, we call it process request. And that process request will be called in both methods. You can see in the do get here, you've called what? The process request. In the do post too, you call the what? Process request. And the other methods, get servlet info, I want to remove it, I'm not interested in that. And I'm not interested in these guys too, for now. The comments are too much. It's good you leave them, but for the purpose of explanation, let me just clear that to make the code fit onto the screen. So we have do process, do get, and what? Do post. And that do process is being called on both sides. So in our case, when I submit a get request, it will come and call what? The post request. It will come and call what? The do post, and do the post. But within the do post, you are calling the what? The process request. Then this method takes two parameters: the request and the what? Response. It's a means to talk to what? Web pages or your server. The request and the what? The response. So the request is whatever you want to request from it, and the response is what you want to send back to the what? The web page or the browser. So in our case, you want to take the data from the what? The forms, and do what? Insert into what? The database. We already have our database manager here. student manager here, which does the what? Insertion. So first, I will create instance of the class that I will need in my servlet. So at the top here, just like any other class, usually servlet comes with a method, we call it init. Init. That's what we use to initialize all your what? Configurations and properties. Example, database connection. If you want to connect to database anytime you start the servlet, any code that you want to run once in the lifetime of the web page, you put them in the what? The init. You have init, service method, and the destroy. These are the three major methods. Now the service method, you don't explicitly override them when you are using HTTP servlet. The do get and the do post internally are translated into what? The servlet, the service method. So you don't override the service method unless you are doing the generic servlet. So in our case, you just be using the do get and what? The do post. But I'll create an instance of the student manager. So student manager. I just need a manager, then I'll create an instance of the student. So student now. Student down, this will be the student. Then in my init, I'll not call the super dot init. I'll just say manager is equal to new, just like anything that we were doing, new manager. Then student, I'll call the default constructor is equal to new student down. I'll just call the default constructor. Let me go and remove that exception I created over there. So I'll go to student down. I ask this guy to throw some variable exception, and it's telling me up there. So student web, now that exception is gone. So I've created my what? Means to talk to the database, which is already built already. Now I have to get the parameters from the what? The web page. Then insert into the what? The database. You do everything in the what? The do process, because anything you do in the do process will reflect on what? The do get and the what? The do post, depending on your method that you use on your form submission. The request method is what comes from the what? The website. Then the response is what we send back to it. So in order to get the parameters, first let me go to my JSP page and see the names of my parameters or my fields. I have what? Name and what? Level. I use the same name as I use in the database. So I'll come to my student web. Then I'll just say, I've already created a student object. I have getter and setter. So I have to set those values. So I'll just say student dot set level. Student dot set level. I'm looking for that level. That level I'm getting from what? The form field or the test field. To get the data from the test field, you use the what? The request. So request dot get parameter. There's a get parameter method, and it takes a string, and the string is the name of the field that we gave to it in the form. So the name was what? This level. So level. So this is what you do. The same with the other one. Student dot set name. Request dot get parameter. That's what? Name. So you've gotten our data from the what? The forms. I can now what? Call the manager to come and insert what? The student. And anytime I insert a student in my student manager, when I add, it was what? Boolean. So this is what I'll do. I will test whether it was successful. So I'll just check if the manager dot add student, then I'll pass the student to it. So if it is successful, so this one if means if it is true, it will return what? The true. Let me check whether I did that. Okay. If it is successful, I'll change the status to what? True. So it will return true. Then in the web page, if it is true, I want to write something onto the page that student has been saved what? Successfully. Now to write onto the screen, I said you need what? The response what? Variable or object. You can even see here that by default this NetBeans generated what we call the response. So I want to display onto the screen. Now if I'm writing test to HTML. So if you just want a normal web page, the format should be what? Test / what? HTML. Then the second, you can pass the character set to it or other metadata. You know the metadata stuff. Then to write onto the screen, you need another method. Print writer, or it's a class. Print writer out is equal to response dot get writer. This is a factory method, or it's a method that is inbuilt. And this response, because the response is meant to write onto the web page, it has its own what? Writer method. So the response or get writer will get us the writer to write onto the screen, just like our normal out system.out.println. So the same thing. Now that you have the writer, I'll just do this. I'll just do some small HTML, but I'll just say out.println. You can see all the methods that we use. So just print line. Then I'll format some HTML page. So maybe HTML. Even when I just print it, will print student saved successfully. Student saved successfully. Else I'll just display failure. I'll just display failure. Failure. So let's try and see whether what we've done so far will work. So you come. Let me log in. Even if it's not successful, tell us. So I'll try and save. Students saved what? Successfully. So we've gotten the data from the web page and sent to a servlet, and the servlet has processed it by calling our student manager, and to save into the database. So it's the same thing. If you want to get from the database, you tell the servlet, then you display it back to the web page. So let's check whether. But usually it's there by default and it's not continuing. So with this small example, we've been able to do what? Save into our database, which we've already created. So we just saved what? Brian Tracy, and you can see it's there. You can see how simple it is. Just know, and this JSP, this ones they know them, so you don't have to waste time on the formatting and stuff. The name here should usually match the name in the database and the name you give to your DAO classes. I have a reason for that. We'll be doing Java Bean and other things maybe tomorrow. But I just wanted to get a feel. The whole purpose of what we've been doing so far is that for you, you'll be getting your input from the web page. So I'll not waste my time on, or you'll not be discussing input output that much. That's not your focus. Or any graphical distance. So you'll be doing all those things from this web page. Then give it to the servlet. The servlet will call your backend, do your backend, then save it to the database. So there's samples. Then assuming I want to get data from the database too, I'll just put maybe another form or button. I'll just put another button. When you click, it will do what? Submit and get the data from the database, then to display for you.